Now, tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Mansions and houses. Tax. The cost of living. The idle rich and the hard-working poor. The hard-working rich and the idle poor. Make or break for Keir Starmer. Make or break for Rachel Reeves. We will get onto all of that stuff, I promise. All the eve of budget leakage and blether. You'll hear from one of the most quietly important cabinet ministers in that story, Pat McFadden, a little later on. And a stellar series of business guests, including Sir Rocco, Forte and Kirstie Allsopp. But first tonight, let's turn to something that is more important. Whether or not Ukraine is being betrayed in what may be the endgame after the Russian invasion. Tonight, we hear that President Zelenskyy is heading for Washington, probably this week, to finalise the deal from his side. Donald Trump's first version of this was, to put it bluntly, a knife in the back. Now Keir Starmer and other European leaders have intervened to give Ukraine more guarantees. What we don't know is whether this less bad deal has any chance of being accepted by Russia. Anyway, big night, big week. And for those of you still thinking, yeah, but it's all a long way away, it's not really my concern, a few words. Food prices up. You noticed, partly because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Cost of heating my house? Same thing. What about those taxes we'll hear about tomorrow? Well, a lot more of the money you hand over to Rachel Reeves will be going to pay for soldiers and missiles and drones to protect us. Why? You guessed it. But all that, from the inflationary impact to defence spending for the rest of this decade, is only the small stuff. If Putin's Russia is able to gorge on a neighbouring country, slice it up, and wait for the rest of it to die of cold and despair, while an American president looks on and smiles, then all of our futures become more dangerous. My parents' generation fought and died. I have never had to worry about that. I don't want my children to be less safe than I've been. It's as simple as that. Yes, even this week, there are things more important than a budget. Let's talk first to Sir John Sawers, the former head of MI6. Did he think there was a real chance of peace?
I think peace is remote still. It's worthwhile exploring these diplomatic opportunities. Obviously, President Trump is keen to make progress without really knowing where progress can be found. The first attempt was laughably inept, the 28-point plan produced at the end of last week.
It felt like it came from Moscow rather than Washington.
I think there's strong evidence that it was based on a Russian draft. It looked as though some of the language was translated from Russian, and it certainly looked very similar to the Russian ideas put forward in the meeting with Trump in Anchorage and so on. So that was a non-starter. It needed some skillful diplomacy to walk the Americans back, but I think the European leaders and Zelenskyy did quite well on that front.
It was a very worrying moment. Do you think Steve Witkoff is an appropriate person to be negotiating this?
He's appropriate in one regard, which is that he has Trump's confidence. In almost every other regard, I think he has serious shortcomings. He doesn't really know the history of Russia and Ukraine. He doesn't understand the politics, and he's easily duped. Whereas he was able in some ways to make progress in the Gaza crisis, and I think Trump personally made a contribution to that. On Russia-Ukraine, he has always been instinctively gullible, really, of what the Russians tell him.
What do you think would have happened to Ukraine if the original deal had been sort of stuffed down Zelensky's throat and they'd been forced to accept it?
I think they would have ended up as a vassal state of Russia. They wouldn't have been able to defend themselves properly. The Russians wouldn't even have needed to take military action in order to impose their will on Kiev.
And this is the crucial question, because if the diplomatic and the political establishment in Ukraine collapses and the country itself kind of collapses into a semi-anarchic state, that would be very, very dangerous for the rest of Europe.
It would be dangerous for the rest of Europe. Probably not quite as dangerous as having a puppet state of Russia in Ukraine. I think the Ukrainians have fought incredibly bravely to sustain their position. It's obviously very difficult for them. They're losing people. Their electricity grid is suffering. but they are determined to hold out. And in some ways, the Russian invasion of 4 years ago is a seminal moment in Ukraine's nationhood. I think it's forged an identity amongst Ukrainians as bad for Russia, anti-Russian.
Looking at the future, President Zelenskyy himself is under huge pressure at the moment because of the corruption scandal inside Ukraine and the fact, frankly, that Ukraine is running out of troops and people are leaving the front line. So this is a dangerous moment for Ukraine. Do you think there is any way that the Russians will accept a peace deal that still leaves them short of everything that they want in the east of Ukraine? Do they carry on pushing towards Kiev?
Well, we can see the weaknesses and vulnerabilities on the Ukrainian side, as you mentioned, the corruption scandals, the fragility of the front line around cities like Pokrovsk, and also the damage that's been done to their electricity grid. What's harder to see is the pressure that the Russians are under. Their economy does seem to be feeling some strain of being almost 4 years on a war footing. The latest sanctions against Russia have impeded their oil exports, so the volume of Russian oil exports seems to be down, and the price is considerably lower than the market price for that. So all that is creating some financial difficulties, and of course you can't lose up to 1 million of your men dead and wounded over the course of the last 4 years and just write that off. And that will create some pressures within the society as well. Now, what is hard to tell, you cannot see these pressures as they apply on President Putin. But my basic view is that Putin feels that he's winning. He feels that the West is in disarray, and some of the recent events have shown that, given him evidence for that, and that he will press on, not necessarily marching his troops to Kiev, but wanting to ensure that what he calls the root causes of the conflict are addressed, which basically means that Ukraine has to have a pro-Russian government in Kiev, and its armed forces must be of a level which cannot withstand Russian pressure.
Going back to your old job, as it were, I'm told from inside government the real fear is losing American intelligence, losing American eyes from the sky. And that's the one thing that Europe can't replicate, can't help with.
Well, that's certainly true. I think there are two areas of heavy Ukrainian dependence on the Americans. Is battlefield intelligence, which guides their drone strikes and their missile strikes, and it's their air defences. Now, the air defences are stretched already, but the Americans have got the sources of air defence missiles and air defence systems, which Europeans can't provide. So whilst the Europeans have dug deep into their pockets in order to sustain Ukraine, there's certainly certain military provisions that can only really come from the other side of the Atlantic.
Part of this deal, even now, seems to involve Europe accepting that Putin is back in the G8, Russia is back in the G8. Do you think that's something we can swallow?
I don't know what the thinking is in Downing Street on this. I found it hard to accept Putin being in the G8 in the first place when Yeltsin was first invited back in the late 1990s, a whim of President Clinton at the time. It never really worked. The G7 is a forum for discussing economic and political issues amongst democratic countries. Putin is not a great economic power. Russia is not a great economic power, and Putin is not a democratic leader. So he doesn't fit in the G8. I don't know. The extreme version would be that when the next time the Americans chair the G7, which is in 2027, that President Trump might invite Putin to join. But I think if Western leaders have got anything about them, they will simply not turn up.
That would be a very, very interesting moment. Can I ask, if Russia wins this war, either through a corrupt or kind of one-sided deal, so-called, imposed upon Ukraine, or actually on the battlefield, what happens next? How dangerous is that for the rest of us in Western Europe?
Well, I think Western Europe faces some very real dangers. It has two problems. One, it has a resurgent Russia. And it's learned a great deal about warfare with drones and other unmanned systems through the Ukraine war. And the other problem Europe faces is a less reliable United States, which has been underpinning European security for the last 80 years and is now equivocal and unpredictable and unreliable. So Europe is going to have to really step up to provide the level of autonomy on defence that we've not known since before the Second World World War.
And that means putting our hands in our pockets. The budget is tomorrow. How important is it that we get a clear message from the Chancellor that that investment that was promised in extra defence is actually going to happen?
Well, for the national interest, it's very important. The first responsibility of government is to defend our nation and secure our streets and, for our people. Of course, it's never very popular when you've got a choice between
guns and butter,
between the health service and the welfare budget and the defence budget. Politically, the easiest thing to do is to bear down on defence, but that would not be in line with the country's interests. I think Rachel Reeves has got a difficult balancing act tomorrow. She didn't do very well a year ago in her first budget, the last time she was looking at all these things. The tendency is to land it all on wealthy people and on business and trying to protect the ordinary people. I think, frankly, the Prime Minister Starmer needs to square up the British people to the scale of the financial challenges that we're facing, and just tell the British people that we're all in this together and we all have to make a contribution.
Sir John Sawers, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, Andrew.
So there is a Western view of the Ukraine crisis, the view, if you like, from London. But what really counts now is how Putin sees the so-called peace process. What is the view from Moscow? And there's nobody better placed to talk about that than the Russian historian and former boss of the last independent TV operation in Moscow, Mikhail Zygar. He spent the last 6 years writing The Dark Side of the Earth, an account of the fall of the Soviet Union, which is really the origin of this current war. When we met just before we came on air, we spoke about how Russia's desire to take ownership of both Crimea and the Donbass go back to before Putin's reign.
Putin is he's continuing the same historical narrative. He inherited it from the previous generation of Russian nationalists within the Communist Party. So in this book, I follow that line because it seems to me that when the Soviet Union was collapsing, we didn't pay attention to those important characters. All the writers, all the scholars were so much focused on Gorbachev and Yeltsin, thinking that these were the most important people. And all the
relative liberals,
all the Soviet generals, or all leaders of KGB, all the hardliners in the Communist Party were pathetic and ridiculous, and they couldn't do anything. Actually, they could. They were not really smart, but they shaped some kind of that movement. And Putin, cynically, he's not doing that because he's a strong believer in Russian Empire. During those years, in the 80s and in the 90s, he was ardent Democrat. He was vice mayor of St. Petersburg, and he was working with one of the leading
Sobchak.
Anatoly Sobchak, leading Democrat from St. Petersburg. But now he cynically changed his ideas, and he needs that. That's why he's following the concept of KGB leaders like Vladimir Khrushchev, the last head of KGB.
And when we look at the question of why he is still supported in Russia, it's not just terror. You paint this very interesting picture of a whole generation of older Russians who feel genuine hurt and anger and loss at the collapse of the Soviet Union, who really hate America, dislike the West intensely, and are, as it were, his natural allies.
I don't think that it's that simple. So it's not the whole generation, but a lot of people, definitely a lot of people who were born and raised in the Soviet Union are very different from people from the younger generation who were born after Soviet Union collapse. And yes, there is a clear generation gap. We know thousands of stories of families that were torn apart during the invasion of Ukraine, with children leaving Russia or protesting against the war, and their parents who cannot believe that their country could be wrong, and still trying to protect and to support anything Putin does.
The reason I'm interested in the generational point is that it leaves a possibility of optimism. In other words, that younger Russians may feel overall differently about Putin and the authoritarian regime that he represents. Because it's often, you say in the book, no dictatorship lasts forever. But there is a fear that this one could spawn an even worse one after Putin goes.
I don't believe that for Russia there could be anyone worse than Putin, because I'm specialist on Russian elites and on Putin's inner circle. One of my previous books was called All the Kremlin's Men, and that was the history of his inner circle. So definitely, Putin is probably the worst, like the most bloodthirsty politician in Russia, and he is the person who wants this war to continue. That's
doesn't. Interesting. So it couldn't be worse than Putin, you think?
I think so.
Okay. We've talked a lot on the show and generally across London, really, about Trump's attitude to Putin, how Trump sees Putin. How do you think Putin sees Trump?
That's an irony that he is not interested at all. He used to like the idea of some kind of Yalta 2.0 with him and Trump and Xi Jinping dividing the world between themselves. But now he's not sure that he's sure that he doesn't have to make any compromises. He's not ready for any concessions. He doesn't need peace with Ukraine. He prefers war because the war for him is the guarantee that he stays in power forever. So he cannot stop this war. So he will not. So and somehow the last Trump's peace deal was a trap for Putin because Trump was trying to satisfy all Putin's demands, but Putin never thought that was even possible. His demands were unrealistic. He knew from the beginning that Ukraine would never accept it. So and he knows that anyway in 3 years. Probably there's going to be another administration in the U.S. So why compromising with Trump to start again in 3 years?
So your instinct, your prediction would be that there's no way that Putin will accept this deal on offer at the moment.
They started rejecting it even when it was initial, very, very Putinist.
Even when it was their
Trump's plan. Now with Ukraine's pressure and EU's pressure, all those concessions from Ukraine are becoming less and less. So there is no chance that Putin will accept this plan for sure.
Michael Zygar, author of the very, very enjoyable The Dark Side of the Earth. Thank you very much for talking to LBC. Up next, we'll look ahead to tomorrow's budget. Plus, there could be seismic change in England's court system coming, and we'll be talking about that as well. You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time now, 6:19.
LBC app.
6:21, and so to tomorrow's budget. Nobody would say this has been an elegant political dance by the Treasury or by Downing Street. The crudest criticism in advance of Rachel Reeves's strategy is that she's giving money to people on welfare to protect her Labour base while making it harder to create wealth. In other words, whatever the rhetoric, this will be a duck and dive, dodge the difficult stuff budget for continued decline. That is what a big chunk of the country fears. Is it fair? Well, to talk about the welfare and spending side of the equation, I'm joined now by Pat McFadden, the Work and Pension Secretary, and I should say, a man often tipped himself as a future Chancellor should the vacancy arise, which of course it may not. Pat, very good to have you on the show.
It won't, because we've got a very good Chancellor and I want ought to be there for a very long time.
Very well said. Okay, let me talk about the overall strategy question, which is that clearly a Labour government, you're going to protect working people's incomes. You've got a big increase in the minimum wage coming, and you're protecting welfare. But your critics say the problem is to do that, you are taxing more and more of wealth-creating Britain. The very rich are leaving. A lot of businesses are not hiring people. What about the overall strategy here?
I think you'll see three things as priorities in the budget tomorrow. The first will be to help people with the cost of living, and part of that is the national minimum wage increase, but there are other elements of that too, including, for example, one of the things in my responsibility, which was raising the state pension next year by over £500 for the course of the year, freezing prescription charges, rail fares and so on. We know that people are struggling to make ends meet, and that will be a big part of the budget tomorrow. Secondly, what you'd expect from a Labour government, the public square, the public realm. The most critical part of that is the NHS. We have only started to turn that round with falling waiting lists. I would argue, as you'd expect, that's not just a matter of public services, it's an economic issue too. So we'll want to continue progress with that. And on the macroeconomic side, what you hear a lot from the Chancellor, because she's very conscious of this, is that we've got to get borrowing down in the longer term, and that the cost of servicing the country's debt has increased considerably in recent years with higher interest rates. They've started to come down, but we want to continue that progress into next year.
Let me ask you about the minimum wage, because a lot of people listening will be wondering exactly what's going to happen.
In terms of the rise, well, the minimum wage will go up in line with the recommendations from the Low Pay Commission. I should say, we don't pluck minimum wage figures out of the air. We've got an internationally recognised process for this, where the Low Pay Commission takes into account the economic environment, the labour market and so on, before recommending its increased rates. We will abide by those recommendations, and that will mean a pay rise for around 2.5 million people.
I've been talking to business people, including the founder of Itsu this afternoon, for instance, who says that really this strategy is disastrous if you want them to hire more people. Already you've got the national insurance contribution rise from the last budget, and this on top simply means that fewer younger people will actually get jobs.
Well, there's an important tax break for hiring young people. Anyone under the age of 21 who's hired, the employer doesn't have to pay employers' national insurance contributions on that, and that's a recognition in the tax system that we want young people to be hired. But young people or older people, we want to make work pay. We want to make sure that if people are going out and doing the right thing, getting up to go to work every morning, that they are decently rewarded. And for young people in particular, we have that employers' national insurance break.
I said in my introduction that it hadn't been a particularly elegant dance into this budget. I think that was a very kind euphemism on my part. It's been an absolute horlicks in many respects. But it's also very, very late. Who decided that the budget was going to be this late?
Well, I mean, the Treasury decides the budget date. People won't have long to wait. We have the budget tomorrow.
They haven't got long to wait now, but they've had weeks and weeks and weeks of speculation and leaks and counter leaks and drips and drabs and all the rest of it. And that's had the effect of actually freezing quite a lot of the economy. People have not been hiring, they've not been spending because they're worried. Can I just put it to you, the whole budget process is actually causing trouble for the economy now.
Well, look, these fiscal events do suck up a lot of political and economic energy.
Are they worth it?
Well, we have to have an annual budget. And a lot of the speculation is simply people saying they might do this, they might do that. It's got nothing to do with the government. That is not within our control. But the important thing is we're at the end of this now. We will have the budget tomorrow. And I think it will reflect those three priorities that I said at the beginning of the interview.
These kind of things do happen, but I have never seen or heard before a Chancellor being so open about possibly raising income tax and breaking the manifesto pledges, and then briefings coming quite so quickly saying, no, we're not going to do that after all. Now, there's a strong belief inside the Treasury those briefings came from number 10. You're at the centre of things. How are relations between numbers 10 and 11?
Good. And it's a really important partnership because as you're aware, Andrew, I have been around the block a few times and I've seen
it
several
less good
incarnations
and it's genuinely good
partnership.
This time,
it is a good partnership. The partnership between the Prime Minister Kirstie and the Chancellor Rachel Reeves is the most important partnership in government, and that relationship between any Prime Minister and Chancellor is the most important. So it's open. It is good. People talk to one another. They share the issues. There'll have been extensive dialogue in the run-up to the budget between the Chancellor, the Prime Minister, their respective teams. This is good. I've seen it up close for several years now, and that's the way it should be.
I spent a lot of time hanging around the Commons, as I do, and I have never come across quite such hostility to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor from Labour MPs as I'm getting at the moment. And there are a lot of them, as you know, talking about the need for a change in direction, a change of leadership, either around Christmas or around May, those elections. What would you say to people who are thinking that way?
Look, the election that we fought and won was, less than 18 months ago. That didn't fall from the sky. I was the campaign coordinator for that election. Keir Starmer is only the fourth Labour leader in history to win a convincing majority from opposition. I think people have to understand the story that went into that in terms of the change in the Labour Party. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was a big part of that story too. So I understand that people, when the political going gets choppy, might reach for that kind of lever and that kind of chat. But I think we have a good leadership team. I think the budget tomorrow is an important moment. I'm sure the Chancellor herself will be quite glad to finally get up and deliver the budget. And I think people will see a budget that helps people with the cost of living, which is the most important thing to people out there, helps us continue to renew the public square, which is what people should expect from a Labour government, but also maintains the macroeconomic stability that has helped us see 5 interest rate reductions since the election, reducing the cost of borrowing, better for homeowners. We've got to keep that trajectory going into the new year.
Just pushing back a little bit on what you were saying about the leadership of the party, it's one thing to win a general election against a profoundly unpopular Conservative government. It's another thing to lead the country in a way that people find convincing. And an awful lot of people don't feel they're getting a clear sense of direction, don't feel they're getting a clear story from this government.
Well, the one thing, as you put it, is something that has eluded most Labour leaders in history. I think Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves deserve great credit for what they did then. But I'm not saying that people should just bank that and not think anything else. I think the government's made good progress. It's had a choppy couple of months, but I think the budget tomorrow is going to be an important political moment and an important economic moment too.
All right, let me cover this from the other side, as it were, and ask you whether trying to topple the Prime Minister at this stage, after only, 14 months in government, etc., would actually be so repellent to the electorate. It would make them think of what happened under the Conservatives, that it would be extremely bad for your party.
I do think that's worth bearing in mind. I mean, one of the phrases I used, and I think the Labour Party used quite a lot during the campaign, was stop the chaos. The idea that we have to junk leaders and prime ministers every couple of years, I think does introduce instability into politics. So that is also a factor in this and worth bearing in mind. This year we've conducted 3 important trade agreements with some of the biggest economic powers around the world. We have to build on that in the new year. Tomorrow is an important budget. Let's get it done. And I think people will see a lot of good news on the 3 fronts that I mentioned at the beginning.
Well, in different ways, we're all looking forward to it very much. Pat McFadden, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Now then, 3 big business names coming for you next. We'll get the budget hopes and fears of Itsu CEO Justin Metcalfe, the hotel tycoon Sir Rocco Forte, and locations Kirstie Allsopp. But
just say, play LBC.
6:34, and next, a huge story I really wanted to make sure did not get lost in all the Budget Eve hysteria. The government is considering a massive change to the court system in England, and Aggie Chambre is here to tell us more. Aggie, the headline.
The headline is the government is considering putting forward the fact that only rape, murder, manslaughter and some public interest cases will be heard by juries. The rest of cases some suggest about 3/4 of trials would just be heard by a singular judge. Now, early this year, retired Court of Appeal Sir Brian Leveson, he's a judge, recommended the government ends jury trials for many serious offences, not because he wanted to, but to prevent total system collapse. And now it is reported that David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, wants to go even further than that. So, as I say, basically getting rid of jury cases for rape, murder, manslaughter and public interest. Now, this is being described, unsurprisingly, as radical, and it is already facing a huge onslaught of criticism.
The government is saying this is just a plan, but it's clearly a plan they're thinking seriously about, because they put out written statements to different departments across government. This is not the end of the jury trial, the historic jury trial in England, but it's a pretty big stride towards it. What kind of cases would no longer have jury trials under these plans?
Well, huge swathes of cases. So fraud, theft, scams, assault, actual bodily harm, embezzlement, and that's just to name a few. There would be huge numbers of cases that would no longer be heard by a jury of their peers. As you say, the sort of ancient right to be heard before a jury of your peers. Now, as you say, the Ministry of Justice saying no final decision has been taken. But I think the point of this being put forward, and as you say, it's sort of this thing called Right Round, where it's written to every Whitehall department by the Ministry of Justice, is because they think it is unsustainable to have the level of backlog that they have at the moment, pointing to the 78,000 cases in the backlog. And in this Right Round, David Lammy says they think that will reach 100,000 by the end of this Parliament.
Well, it's a grim story, I have to say. Aggie, thank you very much indeed. Now, I want to look forward to tomorrow's budget, but not from now on with politicians, instead with a trio of people who understand business, wealth and how to create it. But as you'll hear, they don't agree about everything. Let's begin with Sir Rocco Forte, chairman of Rocco Forte Hotels, big supporter of Boris Johnson back in the day and of Brexit. Rocco, how's it gone since the election, do you feel?
It couldn't have gone worse, frankly. Basically, I think the Chancellor has really trashed the economy. She's created huge levels of uncertainty. She speculated a long time before the first budget and created uncertainty. People were waiting. They wouldn't do anything until the budget came out. She came out with a budget which hit business very hard, and many small businesses have suffered and gone under. And with the second budget, she didn't learn from the first one, and she did the same thing. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of uncertainty, and the economy is at a standstill as a result.
I'm going to come on to the speculation in a moment, but let's start with something that we know for sure, because we've just had Pat McFadden talking about it, which is that they're going to raise the minimum wage. What effect will that have?
Will that have another big effect on small businesses who are already suffering because of the national insurance increase? A lot of them are already gone under, and many more will be affected. It's much higher than the rate of inflation and much higher than they can raise their prices by. And therefore, the only thing is it'll affect profits, it'll affect employment, which has already fallen significantly since the last budget.
Sir Rocco, what about a tourist tax? I mean, after all, Venice has one, Barcelona has one, I think Paris has one as well. Why shouldn't London and Edinburgh have a tourist tax?
Well, because it's another tax on the hotel industry. I mean, the industry's suffered already with national insurance. It's suffered with the increase in the minimum wage. I mean, not hotels like mine so much. But it's another tax on the industry. Tourists already pay 20% VAT on their hotel bedrooms and meals. They're spending money in the economy. Why would they be singled out for an extra tax? In my business, we charge 5% service charge on rooms, which is distributed to the staff. You have another percentage tax, which maybe we won't be able to enforce that 5% service charge, and our workforce will suffer as a result. And in European countries where there is one, it's at a very low level. It's not a percentage of sales. The luxury tourist, the one that's giving most benefit to the economy because it's travelling, going to theatre, taxis, hire cars, and so on. And they're the ones who are going to have to pay the highest level of tax. It's ridiculous.
Your hotels, I'm thinking of the Balmoral in Edinburgh and Brown's in London, have a pretty well-heeled clientele. What is your impression of what the rich are doing now? Because we hear lots of stories about people actually leaving this country because they feel they're taxed too much and they're too depressed about growth. Are you seeing that happening among people that you're moving with, talking to?
Well, I mean, the most of in my hotels, most of the business is from overseas. It's not related to the UK to any great degree. Our biggest customer base is from the United States. American, there are a lot of very wealthy Americans who love traveling. They like going to Scotland. They like coming to the UK. And, of course, they like going to Italy, where a lot of my hotels now are. And we haven't seen any real change in relation to those people. There was a bit of a hiatus with all the tariff debacle in the States and the stock market dropping, and there was a sort of pause in bookings for a couple of months, but it's all picked up very much since.
Just very briefly, back in 2023, I think you were disappointed by what had happened after Brexit, and you said yourself you were thinking of leaving the country. Are you still in that mood?
I wasn't leaving the country because of Brexit. I was disappointed that nothing had happened with Brexit. It hadn't been used. I've already left the country. I left well before the last election.
Oh, so you're here visiting us rather than...
Yes, absolutely.
I understand.
Yeah. And I said I would, but I could see what was coming. A lot of businessmen supported the Labour government. I think they must be regretting it very much now.
I'm sure some of them are anyway. So, Rocco, thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to me. Next, another giant from the retail industry, this time somebody who helps to feed us rather than to house hotel guests. Julian Metcalfe is the man behind Itsu, the hugely successful food chain. Miso soup and sushi and ginger and hot rice dishes. I go there a lot myself, I have to say. I asked how the Chancellor's national insurance rise on business in her last budget affected his restaurants, his staff and his customers.
Of course it did. It stopped everyone. It's put the real dampeners on the hospitality industry. It was really cruel and short-sighted, I think. And it's probably pushed up prices for everyone, all your listeners. I mean, there's no question that hospitality's now it's gone up a lot in price because of these type of things. Yeah, it's a shame.
So we've had the Chancellor talking about, reversing what she said on income tax. She's not going to do that, but all sorts of possibilities. But if she reversed that, you'd be delighted.
We'd be delighted, but I doubt they will. I don't think they will. And I don't think any amount of bleating and pain and suffering and closures in our industry will make any difference, I'm afraid. Tragically, I think it's a kind of bigger issue than that.
Let's stick with employees, and particularly younger employees, because you were famous for early on. You were saying you wanted 2-year visas to bring more people into the employment market in the UK. Now that world has probably gone. Do you accept that?
I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's, when all this changed in 1997, I remember, the Italians and the French, the Spanish, they were unbelievable. Because a great many wanted to come for 2 years. They wanted to learn to speak English, get away from home. They were 18, 19. They were quite courageous people. And they built our hospitality industry in this country really changed forever from that day whenever it was 1990, I think, is when they allowed students to work from Europe.
EU.
The EU was unbelievable. We started getting cooks, people who cared about food, people who were really proud of service. And it changed for the next 25 years. It built the industry.
And then Brexit came along.
So those days are definitely over. So an enormous amount of effort, time, and very difficult employing people in the hospitality industry now, which has had a terrible effect on pricing.
Let me ask you about NEETs, the so-called people who are not in employment or education and are sitting at home, many of them on different kinds of benefits. There is a belief in the country, a belief in the political class that they're kind of idle and lazy and put off the whole idea of work. In your experience, is that true? And what can be done to bring more British people back into the employment market?
Look, from the very beginning, we took the relationship we had with our staff unbelievably seriously. And I'm not suggesting a great many people don't. But for us, at Pret, Manger and then Itsu, it's a completely make or break. I had a long letter this morning from a customer about a girl called Sona who works in, I think, Ken High Street. I can't tell you how much effort, love and care has gone into, and creativity has gone into the relationship we have with our staff. It's everything. And that's what they deserve. And if you really want to build a great company, that relationship is so fundamental. It's also much easier said than done.
Well, there was a big report recently called the Mayfield Report about the treatment of people with illnesses of different kinds, but including relatively mild mental illnesses.
Yes.
And part of what it said is that employers have to think much more carefully about people who come in, start work, and then become depressed or get stressed or whatever it might be. In other words, help them to get over that and get back to work rather than leaving it to the state.
I think most people crave they crave companionship and a good working life. I've always believed that 99% of people are good. They are fundamentally, they are good.
What
Don't you? I think it's not just complicated as
couldn't agree with you more.
it.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Who wants to sit at home all day? You know, if the work was interesting and you had good colleagues and a good, I don't think people want to sit at home doing nothing. It's not true.
And get out there, make friends, change the world in however small a way.
Yeah.
What does Itsu teach you at the moment about the state of the British economy?
Well, personally, a number of things. I mean, it teaches all of us, every single one of us at Itsu, that we are, within reason, in control of our own destiny. So grit and never giving up and always keep focusing on the detail, on the customer. Just, it's all very well saying this, but honestly, I mean it. Never, ever give up. Trying to provide good value for money and wonderful products in an environment where the staff who work there really, really do care. And it's so easy to talk about this like this, but actually it's extremely difficult, and that's probably why a great many businesses don't, in the end, manage to survive.
But this is still, in your view, a country where you can build a good business, great profits.
Yes.
And we hear lots of people going abroad at the moment, leaving the UK because of tax.
Or there's so much doom and gloom. But frankly, no, I think this is still still very much a country where, I mean, you can open a business and start a business and run a business, and if you care enough, of course you can do well. Absolutely. There's no need to leave the country.
Thinking about tomorrow, the Chancellor herself, she had a terrible inheritance. She's made some big mistakes, and she's having a torrid time at the moment. What's your view of her generally?
I think there's been so much written, so much said. I can't add anything more. We're all aware it's a very difficult time. We're all aware that politics is unfortunately quite short term. It needs to be long term, and that's not going to change. So all I can do is wish her well. But most of my time, honestly, is spent on the detail and trying to nurture the people I work with and the customers.
Well, I wonder if there is a kind of parallel with business here, because almost anybody who's run a business and made a business has made serious mistakes. I mean, mistakes and big mistakes. And by and large, they carry on, they learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
But in politics, we assume that if you make a big mistake, out you go, and bring somebody else in. That doesn't appear to work very well.
No, why is that, do you think? I mean, you know better.
Because you're constantly bringing in people who have to learn all over again.
All over again.
And the machine doesn't have to learn.
And it is very short term, isn't it?
Very short term.
Very,
indeed.
very, very
and
short
getting
term.
more so.
And getting more so, yeah. There's probably the biggest challenge, actually.
Well, Julian, thank you very much indeed for coming in. You're talking to a loyal customer, I have to say.
Thank you.
We're going to hear next from Kirstie Allsopp with reports that Rachel Reeves has watered down her plans for a mansion tax in tomorrow's budget. Is the government taking the right approach to housing in its pursuit of economic growth? Time now, 6:48.
Tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:50. So let's leave behind the food and hotel industries and think instead about housing. One of the most heavily trailed likely new taxes in the budget, we don't know yet for sure, is a so-called mansion tax, an impost of around £4,500 a year on houses worth more than £2 million. Let's talk to Kirstie Allsopp, the property expert, host of Location, Love It or List It UK, and many other shows. Kirstie, great to have you on the programme. First of all, what's your reaction to the mansion tax as an idea?
You know what, Andrew? It doesn't leave behind food and hospitality. It was lovely just now hearing my dear friend Julian Metcalfe on your show. But it's food and hospitality that suffers if people don't feel they have money in their pockets. And they don't at the moment because they don't know what the value of their home is.
Mm-hmm.
It's
so it
very
all
interesting.
Connects. It
all connects, and that is the problem. That it's not a case of simply slapping on a mansion tax, making those people who are lucky enough to live in a house worth £2 million pay a bit more, and then putting that to one side. It doesn't work like that.
And what about this cut-off? I think it was originally going to be 1.5 million, which brought in so many relatively ordinary Londoners in particular, and people living in the southeast, because they'd been, their houses have just gone up and up and up, and their salaries or their incomes have not necessarily gone up and up and up. It's now 2 million. What do you think the effect on the market of that will be?
How many houses do you think were worth 2 million or 2.1 million or 2.2 or 2.3 a few weeks ago?
Do you know what, Kirstie? I haven't the faintest idea.
Well, you see, no one does either. And that is the problem. Rachel Reeves has no way of valuing these properties. A property is only worth what people are prepared to pay for it. So that is the problem with this tax. It is an incredibly inefficient way. And again, going back to your very interesting conversation with Julian, yes, Rachel Reeves is having a hard time at the moment. And yes, people are being very critical. But what she hasn't done is listen to the experts on this. And I am not an expert. There are many, many very wise economists and people who have said, don't do this. Tim Lernig, who is one of the most respected professor at the LSE, said in the Treasury Select Committee the week before last, a mansion tax is such an inefficient way of raising taxes, we're better off having a whip round in the Select Committee.
It reminds me a little bit of the window tax, and then lots of people bricked up their windows back in the 18th century. What do you make of the Chancellor's complaint, however, that a lot of the criticism against her has been sexist?
You know what? I'm afraid I think it's rubbish. We've had 3 female prime ministers. We've had female home secretaries. We've had female ambassadors. We've had female foreign secretaries. We've had a queen, many, many, many great queens, but 3 absolutely incredible, notable queens. And, we are not a country where we have a problem with women having the top jobs.
So absolutely not sexist. Thinking about other much discussed measures in the budget, of course, all the way through the government has said that growth is their lodestar. That's what they're really interested in. And in particular, the housing stock, the shortage of housing in the country. What would you like to see them do to actually increase the number of houses?
I'd like this to see them sit down with the industry and find out what the industry wants them to do. Because the fact is the government isn't digging the holes in the ground. It's not putting the bricks up. When they say we are going to build 1.5 million houses, Steve Reed is not going out there and building them himself.
That's true.
So they need to sit down with the industry and say, what is the barrier to you building more houses? Because there is nothing being built in London. Literally, when people exaggerate, they always say big absolute words like nothing, but literally, virtually no new building going on. And that is increasingly the case in other parts of the country. It has got to a point now where it just isn't economically viable. And this is a real problem. And the government needs to sit down with all the house builders and all the big ones, the small ones. I wish there were more of the small ones. I wish they did loads of things to encourage small to medium-sized builders and say, right, we want you to build. How do we do that? Because it comes back to this same thing. There is a slight problem with this government that they do not consult who know. Because there are loads of people who know, and there are lots of people. And it was the case with the previous government. This is not political. It was just the same with the Tories. Loads and loads of people who'd only ever worked in government. They hadn't had actual real jobs, and this is a problem. And this cabinet is rife with people who haven't had real jobs.
I can't have an argument with you about that, Kirstie. Let me ask you, just circling back to the so-called mansion tax, and I don't think there's many real mansions involved in this.
No.
What does it do to the economy generally, do you think? What does it do to, as it were, quotes, ordinary people, quotes, if the top end of the housing market is completely frozen or going down?
It's a chain. It's an ecosystem. I mean, it's like a bowel. You have to put things in to get stuff out. And that isn't happening. And the whole market is slowing down. What it does to quote unquote ordinary people is that if at the top end there's problems, a lot of people who work in the industries that service those top end houses go out of business. Fardearth, a tile company, went out of business last week.
Carpenters, carpet fitters, plumbers, electricians, etc.
All those people have a real problem.
It's really worth remembering that. Kirstie, thank you very, very much indeed for talking to me tonight. Let's now go back to the court story we spoke about with Aggie, Chambre, a little earlier on, that could see almost 3/4 of all cases in England not being tried just by being tried by a judge with no jury at all. That would be a seismic change. Let's talk about it further with Richard Atkinson, former president of the Law Society of England and Wales and a criminal defence solicitor himself. Richard, thanks very much indeed for joining me. This seems to me a very, very important moment.
Absolutely. This is a seismic change in what is, if these proposals are to be brought forward, in the way in which we conduct criminal justice in this country, and a most unwelcome change. We have described it, we the Law Society, as an extreme measure, and I think that's a fair assessment of this. We, of course, face a major crisis of a huge backlog in both the Crown Court and the Magistrates' Courts. And those backlogs have consequences for the individuals involved. And I don't seek to diminish in any way the impact of those backlogs on the individuals concerned. But to change our system, to deny members of the public a role in our justice system, in the interpretation of the system, its execution, is such a major change, and without any real evidence base to suggest that this is going to deliver and reduce the backlogs in the way that the government might hope.
I think the government would say that the crisis is so great they have little choice. I mean, David Lammy himself a few years ago said this: jury trials are a fundamental part of our democratic settlement. Criminal trials without juries are a bad idea. Now, assuming that he hasn't completely changed his mind, he's doing this because of force majeure. There is no alternative.
Well, I don't agree. Firstly, this is an untested proposal. So he's not saying this will deliver a reduction in the backlogs by this time or at this point, or that it's going to be a temporary measure. It seems to be that this is to be a business as usual going forward measure. It is fraught with risks. We are talking about now, instead of Sir Brian Levison's proposals, where the lowest end of those cases dealt with in the Crown Court would have been dealt with by a judge and two magistrates, two lay people, that you will now have a single person as the determiner of guilt or innocence. And we know that people make mistakes.
Indeed, that will worry an awful lot of people very much indeed. Richard Atkinson, thank you so much for speaking to LBC tonight. It's the big day tomorrow. Join me at 6 for all the budget analysis you'll need from me, economic bigwigs and all the main parties. If you missed today's show at all, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion, put your news categories in the order you'd like them, pause, rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts. So download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now.